Hello, everybody. Greetings from Johannesburg, South Africa. It is a pleasure to share this virtual space for y'all tonight. What I'll be speaking about is the feedback loop between fictional futures and real futures. So let's go straight into it. Well, first of all, I used futures in plural. Why? Because there's no one singular predetermined inevitable future. If somebody ever tells you that this is the only way that future is going to be, you might know that person could be a charlatan. The best that we can do as futures researchers and futurists and foresight practitioners is to predict the possibility space within which certain things are most likely, certain things are less likely, and certain things are entirely impossible based on our current understanding of science, technology, political, social, cultural development. However, with every new change in the human story, that possibility space shifts either a little bit or quite a lot. So every day, with everything that we do, we are shaping the future. Our actions are shaping the future, yes, but also our inaction, also our apathy. Whenever we decide the future is being decided by somebody else, somewhere else, and we disengage from future making, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. As Stephen King says, the quickest way to learn about a new place is to know what it dreams of. So over the past decade in my nomadic life, traveling in over 90 countries, I've been learning about the kind of futures people dream in a global north and a global south, young people and old people, people from all walks of lives and disciplinary backgrounds. And one recurrent thing that I found is that the way we dream about the future is really influenced by the fictions of the future that we have consumed throughout our lives. So here, what I want to say is that ultimately it's those who control the fantasy that control the future. It's not the Jeff Bezos and Sergey Brin's and the Elon Musks of the world, the tech billionaires that are building these, unicorn sort of trillion-dollar companies that ultimately are deciding what future is going to be like. Many of them, most of them, in fact, as little boys, because, well, most of these people I mentioned are boys, have picked up a particular book or watched a movie or TV series, even more likely, which has affected the way they have imagined the future. And then they set out with their entire life to go and build it. What's quite unfortunate about that is that most of these stories of the future that are really the most influential in the kind of technologies that these major corporations are building towards today have in fact been influenced by very old science fiction that was built on the very old science, essentially from mid-20th century to late 20th century, and not really what is the bleeding edge today. And so what I want to invite you today to is to actually dream things much further and much more beyond than what we have been perceiving through what has been offered to us by the dystopia utopia binary of the imaginations of the future's past. We can, I think, pretty much acknowledge that we have been experiencing a bit of a crisis of imagination, very much predicated to the lack of the frameworks and the lack of these grand ideas upon which futures could be built. So, well, what is utopia and what is dystopia and why are they different? Dystopia, to start with, is this idea of a future where everything has gone wrong, and so there's nothing we can do about it, and the only thing we can do is really just consume while the world ends. What it leads to, ultimately, is desperate escapism. If we feel there's nothing we can do about the future, well, then we'll do nothing. That's on one side, that's more for general population. But within the technological industry, oftentimes dystopia and a cyberpunk as a genre, which initially arose to actually oppose utopian visions of a future and to reconsider critically the impact of different scientific research and technologies, in fact just has become a regurgitated aesthetics that unfortunately ends up also becoming very much a product roadmap. A perfect example would be a movie such as Minority Report, which is a surveillance state dystopia that ended up on so many of the VC pitch decks for the companies that were attempting to explore and make augmented virtual mixed reality technology platforms and supports. So, we've seen similar examples with Black Mirror TV series and so many others, right? So dystopia has become the sort of vicious cycle of us just seeing that there's nothing we can change about the future. So the answer to it historically has been utopia. Well, utopia, what do we often perceive it as? We perceive it as this perfect future where we've leapfrogged all of the current problems and we live in this perfect state. But don't we dare to question what actually that state is built upon. When we look at historical examples of utopianism, what we see is that the colonial project, the Manifest Destiny, Nazi Germany, apartheid South Africa, they were utopias for the people that were benefiting from them. So utopia has always been somebody else's dystopia, and it has been eugenic and exclusionary by default, most specifically targeting people with disabilities, queer people, and indigenous belief systems. So utopia is not the answer to dystopia. It's just really a reverse side of the same coin. Which leads us to really think, well, where does the very idea of futurism come from? And something that was quite central to it is the Futurist Manifesto, which was written by Marinetti in the times of the fascist Italy. So it was really, I'll quote the quote by Jay Griffiths, it was an adoration of the machine to the point where the ultimate aim was the technological triumph of humanity over nature. Marinetti foresaw and was intoxicated by the idea of war between organic nature and mechanized humanity. Futurists fetishized cars, planes, and technology in general. They wanted to force the Danube to run a straight line at 300 kilometers an hour, hating the river in its natural state. The opaque, this is a direct quote, the opaque Danube under its muddy tunic, its attention turned on its inner life full of fat libidinous fecund fish. So the futurism historically has been bent on engineering away the messy living world and in some ways the messy living human beings. And we see sort of the relic of that in a lot of the future visions even to this day. And when I was asked to give a talk on this theme of beyond the conference, my goal was really, how can we think of technology and technological innovation and scientific research as something that goes beyond that duality of the living world and technology? So here it's very important to kind of really confront this equation, that technological innovation without humanitarian evolution always equals an oppressive future. So we must resist both nostalgic ideas of going back in some kind of fictionalized past, but also techno-fetishism as the answer to that nostalgia. What I want to say and what I want to offer is to really start thinking of technology as something entirely unexotic, simply as an extension of our biology and of our minds. Right? If we stop actually thinking about technology as something that has desires and volitions and ideas of its own, and simply as something that we do, something that we create, something that we design, something that we imagine, something that we use, we start taking responsibility for how we do it. And here, my equation for a truly inclusive, aka protopian future, is humanitarian evolution plus technological innovation equals protopian, aka inclusive future, right? So humanitarian evolution first and foremost, and technology has to flow out of that. It's not something that leads the way. It's really something that follows our intentions and what we want to achieve with it, the goals that we have, right? So to have particular goals, we need to have a bit of a broader framework. Well, what is that future we're designing towards? And I've been attempting over the last few years to sort of in some way categorize even those categories interbleed into each other as sort of a cheat sheet. What do we need to think about whenever we design anything towards the future? It could be technology, but it could also be policy. It could also be, industrial design objects. It could be really anything that is meant to exist in the future and affect how we live in the future. So point number 1, plurality. Point number 2, community. Point number 3, celebration of presence. Point number 4, regenerative action. Point number 5, symbiotic spirituality. Point number 6, criterion subculturist. Point number 7, illusion of values. Screenshot if you need it, and hopefully it could be useful to you. I know this might seem a little esoteric, so let's go into every single point. So, plurality. When I speak about plurality, it's also beyond the binary, right? It's not just more of the different groups, but it's also that fertile space in between the different groups. What that means is that mere tolerance is a failure. Just tolerate the difference is to simply allow it to exist but not be curious about it. We must actively resist all forms of discrimination, exclusion, and otherization, and really embrace cultural, gender, sexual, generational, discipline, plurality, and so much beyond, right? And it's really explore these meeting spaces of our difference, because that's what allows us to not be this homogeneous system. Right? We need to remember that homogeneous system is the easiest system to be hacked and to be destroyed. The more diverse we are, the more different our perspectives are whenever we look at any given problem, the chances are that we'll find a better solution for it, which leads us to community. Community beyond the borders. So many of the science fiction films is really about the special, magical superhero saving the day. And it's somebody that is very distinctly not like us. Well, the future is really made from people like us coming together and learning together and working together, because one individual can never save the day. It's really about people coming together. And so here I want to say that community is the hero of our futures. Which leads us to this idea of celebration of presence. What do I mean by that? A lot of the times technology is imagined as something that isolates us, that makes us more apart, not just from each other, but even from our own bodies. And so here I want to learn, especially from a lot of disability scholars that have been arguing that futures are really not about independence, but about interdependence. And we must imagine, revel in expanded sensory experiences and constantly make vital space for neurodiverse expressions of intimacy, care, and radical tenderness. So technologies that we design should expand human potential, yes, but not just intellectually and physically, but also creatively and emotionally. Ultimately, good technology allows us to be more with each other and more in this world and part of this world, which leads us to regenerative action on life as technology. Right? This really harkens back to what I spoke about in the beginning, that anything that is really futuristic technology is not in opposition of the living world, but learned and is inspired by the living world. As we recognize the rise of the global temperatures, the biosphere collapse, and all of these destructive loops already in motion, we acknowledge that sustainability solutions are becoming entirely insufficient, and it's so urgent to move towards regenerative practices in every aspect of our civilization construct. So in order to do that, we actually must move away from human-centric to life-centric design paradigm. Instead of just building and engineering, we must see how our building and engineering goes together with not just growing, but also rewilding the world, right? How can these things can become more together? And here I think biomimicry inspired designs is such a huge area that we need to explore. Okay, that leads us to symbiotic spirituality. In so many ways, a lot of historical religious frameworks have been in opposition to science and scientific research. What I want us to think about is, well, spirituality has always been important to humans. You know, it's how we actually became the species that we have become. So how how do we imagine the rituals and spirituality of the future that doesn't stifle the scientific research, but actually supports it? And whenever we think about the future of our cities, right, we must think not about just them being efficient and connected and smart, etc., but also how do we create space? How do we create time within them that allows us for these practices of transcendence that have been so historically, but to the present day, important for us as humans? Which leads us to another crucial point that tends to be forgotten and erased out of future conversations: creativity and emergent subcultures. So, from interwoven journeys of our ancestors, the future living fabrics of our cities, we must celebrate the role of creativity and beyond just the elitism of disciplines previously labored as artistic. In both future urban and rural places, we have to ensure to make space for creative practices and experiences, and especially for our youth to express themselves and to create these new subcultures that only enrich both, again, our rural and urban fabric. Which leads me to the very last point, and in a way, it's a point that undergirds all of it, and it's evolution of values. We must move away from colonial and neo-colonial individualist cultures of exploitation and greed, and towards the culture of contribution, to endeavor to nurture, everything that is around this idea of equity and planetary mutuality. As we are facing the planetary boundaries, sooner or later we will have to confront the reality that we must move towards being a material degrowth society. If we're not confronting it today, we're just shoving these problems under the rug. So here, we still have to imagine, how do we grow as humanity, right? And if we can't grow in the material sense because we live in a finite world, what I would like to offer that maybe we can expand and grow in the realms of knowledge and experience. And to finish this whole talk, I want to give an homage to Bell Hooks, one of the great influences in my work and in my thinking of what hopeful future looks like. And her quote is, "To be truly visionary, we have to root our imagination in our concrete reality while simultaneously imagining possibilities beyond that reality." What it means is that we have to confront the mistakes and inequities and injustices and the traumas and the pains of our past. We must look them straight into the eye so that we could not repeat those mistakes and so that we could do better. To just extrapolate from the present day and say that the future is more of the same is not being visionary. To be visionary is to really be aware and consider everything that has come before us, but to imagine something that can be beyond that. So today, I really want to ask all of you to re-examine what has influenced your future dreams, what has shaped them, and how maybe some of these foundations need to be rearranged, and what are the new things and new dreams and new ideas and new cultures and new voices that could be introduced so that we could all dream vaster, braver, and more courageous, so we could change the world, so it's more inclusive and kinder to all of us. Thank you so very much. It was an honor to be here with you today.